What would you do if an HOA tried to arrest you on a lake you actually own? They called the cops to arrest me on my own marina dock. But none of them knew the truth buried in the deed I'd held for years. The HOA thought they controlled the lake, while I watched them hang themselves with the very laws they ignored. What would you do if an HOA tried to take a power you never lost? The first thing I noticed was the heat. High noon over Lake Meridian always felt a little too bright, like someone had cranked the saturation on reality. Sunlight bounced off white hulls and chrome rails, off stainless steel cleats and anchor chains, off the glass doors of the marina office behind me. The whole lakefront was a blinding wall of glare, and right in the middle of it, 3 patrol SUVs sat at crooked angles near the main pier, red and blue lights strobing across the water. I stood at the edge of the center dock with my boots planted on sun-bleached planks, the lake lapping gently against the pilings below. From here, I usually saw fishermen untangling lines, kids in bright life vests, couples hauling coolers toward their boats. Today, I saw uniforms, flashing lights, and a furious woman in a pink suit. "Officer, that's him!" a sharp voice shrieked. "That's the man I told you about. He's trespassing on HOA waters. Arrest him, now!" Bethany Reed stepped into view like she was making an entrance on stage instead of at a mountain marina. The suit hit you first, a violent shade of pink that didn't exist in nature, tailored so tight it looked painted on. Her blonde hair was twisted into a perfect knot that fought the lake breeze, and oversized sunglasses hid her eyes, but not the tight, angry line of her mouth. The part that made my jaw clench was where she was pointing, straight at me. Every head along the pier turned with her hand. Boat owners and weekend vacationers stood shoulder to shoulder on the boardwalk and balconies, phones held high. Yachts bobbed behind them, hulls rocking gently, lines creaking against cleats. A dog barked once. Someone hissed at it to hush, and the sound died in the hot, humming air. A deputy in mirrored sunglasses shifted his weight, glancing from Bethany to me. His badge caught the light in a hard flare. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "we're still trying to understand the situation. Mr. Cole says—" "What he says is irrelevant," Bethany cut in, voice sharp enough to slice the breeze. "He is on Lake Meridian without authorization. The association's bylaws are clear. No non-member may use the water, shoreline, or marina structures without HOA approval. He has refused to join. That makes him a trespasser." "That's not how trespassing works," I said, keeping my voice even. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nobody stepped closer, but nobody walked away. This was better than anything they'd scroll past on their phones. A live HOA showdown, full sun, no commercial breaks. The deputy turned toward me. Mid-30s, solid build, name tag reading Hale. The reflection of the lake shimmered across his jaw. "Sir," he said, "Miss Reed here is the president of the Meridian Shores Homeowners Association. We received a call about a disturbance and reports that you threatened her staff and interfered with HOA operations. She says you're refusing to comply with their lake regulations." Bethany folded her arms as if that closed the book. Behind my back, my fingers tightened around the thick, cream-colored envelope I'd been holding since I stepped onto the dock. The paper was warm now from sun and sweat. It felt heavier than it had in my truck, like the ink inside had picked up weight on the walk down. "I didn't threaten anybody," I said, "and this dock is mine. Always has been." Bethany let out a short, sharp laugh that bounced off the water. "Oh, please," she said. "You own a shack in the trees, Mr. Cole. A cabin, with a little path to the shoreline. The association owns the marina. The association controls the lake. These people," she swept her hand toward the onlookers, "pay good money every month to keep it that way. And we are not going to let one stubborn man jeopardize our property values or our legal liability." "My cabin is not a shack," I almost said, but there were bigger lies floating around than that. Another officer stepped off the pier and onto the center dock with me, boots thudding against the boards. Two more followed, spreading out a little. Their hands hovered near tasers and sidearms, not quite touching, not quite relaxed. I could feel 100 eyes crawling over my life in that moment, over my faded flannel sleeves, worn jeans, scuffed work boots, the sun-bleached ball cap with the damn engineering logo on it. I knew exactly how I looked to them. The guy who never came to HOA meetings, who parked his pickup with mud on the tires, who rebuilt his own dock instead of hiring a preferred contractor. The outsider. "Mr. Cole." Hale's tone stayed professional, but his jaw flexed once. "Do you have any documentation that shows your rights here? Deeds, permits, anything like that?" "Ms. Reed says." "Miss Reed," I cut in gently, "says a lot of things." Her head snapped toward me, but I kept going. "And yeah," I added, "I've got documentation." I brought the envelope into view. The crowd leaned forward as one. Phones lifted a little higher. Sunlight flashed across screens and across the faint circle of the county seal printed through the paper. For a moment, the marina quieted. Engines idled low. Little waves slapped at fiberglass hulls. Someone's cooler lid snapped shut and sounded too loud. "What's that supposed to be?" Bethany demanded, color rising under her makeup. "Something you should have read," I said, "before you called the sheriff on the person who actually lives on this lake." Hale's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to me. "Mr. Cole," he said carefully, "are you saying you own this dock?" "This dock," I said, nodding at the planks under our feet. "And a little more than that." Behind the shorefront buildings, a light wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine resin and hot asphalt. It rippled the flags over the marina office and fluttered the caution pennants on the boat lift cranes. Somewhere down the line, a halyard tapped against a mast. Clink, 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 like a clock ticking in metal. Bethany stepped closer, heels clicking sharply. "Enough," she snapped. "You're wasting everybody's time. You've refused to join the HOA. You've refused to follow our lake rules. You've interfered with security, disrupted inspections, and harassed my staff. That is more than sufficient cause for removal. Officer, I insist you remove him from HOA property immediately." I studied her for a moment. The perfect hair, the perfect suit, the white-knuckle grip on the leather folder in her hands. She wasn't just performing for the cameras. There was fear under the anger, sharp and sour. Not fear of me, fear of what I might prove. "I'm standing on my own easement," I said quietly. "On my own dock, on my own shoreline. And I haven't harassed a single person. What I have done..." I lifted the envelope a little higher. Letting it catch the light is keep very careful records. "What does that even mean?" someone from the crowd called. It was a fair question. It just wasn't one I planned to answer in the middle of the dock with every phone in the county recording. "Sir," Hale said, dropping his voice, "either you come with us and we sort this out at the station, or you show me something right now that explains why Ms. Reed would call us out here." There it was, the pivot point. Behind the deputies, over Bethany's shoulder, I could see the full sweep of Lake Meridian. Deep blue water, forested hills rising in soft green layers behind it, long shadows from the boathouse roofs stretching over the ripples like fingers. To most people, it probably looked calm, like always. I knew better. I knew what lay under that water: rock, silt, old survey pins, the ghost of a mining road, and a stack of paperwork nobody had bothered to pull from the county archives in decades. Bethany thought this was about bylaws and fines. She had no idea what game she'd stepped into. I let out a slow breath, tasted sun-warmed air and lake spray, then looked the sheriff in the eye. "I'll show you," I said. "But when you see what's in here, you're going to start asking a very different question. And what question is that? Hale asked. I glanced past him at the crowd, at the embroidered boat hats and HOA polo shirts, at Bethany burning in the sun like an angry pink lighthouse. Why? I said. An HOA is trying to arrest the man who actually lives on this lake. And just like that, the doc, the sheriff, the hovering security officers, they all blurred at the edges as my mind pulled me backward. Months before this circus. Before the HOA letters. Before Bethany's pink suit became a symbol of dread around Lake Meridian. Before I ever knew neighbors could be afraid of a woman with a clipboard. Back to the cabin. Back to the hills. The first morning I woke there, fog hung low on the water, drifting between pine trunks like it was searching for old secrets. My cabin stood on a rise above the lake, built decades earlier by a miner who preferred silence over company. When I bought it, the porch sagged a little, the windows rattled in the wind, and the roof smelled faintly of cedar and a stubborn kind of hope. It was exactly what I needed. 15 years working as a dam engineer had carved grooves into my life. Early mornings, concrete dust, emergency repairs in snowstorms, long nights staring at water flow charts until my eyes blurred. Water was beautiful, yes, but it could be dangerous. It did not forgive mistakes. And after the flood incident 3 years earlier, after losing a crew member because a pressure gate failed, I couldn't stand the inside of an operations center anymore. So I walked away, sold the house in town, packed whatever fit in my truck, started a quiet life in a cabin that overlooked a lake most folks never thought twice about. Back then, Lake Meridian was just a patch of blue stretching between hills, a place where the water glimmered gold at sunrise and the wind whispered through fir trees. I rebuilt the dock myself, laid every board by hand, sanded them until my palms blistered. The smell of treated lumber mixed with lake mist became the fragrance of my new beginning. No HOA, no meetings about mailbox heights, no neighbors measuring lawn edges with rulers. Just peace. But the strange part, the part no one around the lake seemed to know then, or care about, was how I came to own more than just the cabin. It started with insomnia. I'd lie awake for hours after moving in, listening to the groan of the old cabin settling in the cold. To quiet my mind, I'd gone browsing through county auction records one night, just looking for scrap timber rights or abandoned utility parcels. That's when I found it. A listing so dull and overlooked it felt like a clerical accident. Meridian Lakebed Parcel Group C, submerged land rights, historical transfer category, county reserves not applicable. Minimum bid, $4,000. No description, no photos, just coordinates and the kind of language lawyers use when they don't want anyone asking questions. I placed a bid, half as a joke, half as a test of fate, and forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I received a thick envelope from the county clerk's office. Inside were survey maps drawn decades earlier, stamped deeds transferring lakebed ownership from a defunct mining corporation, and a note from the clerk that read, "Mr. Cole, congratulations. You now own the mud under Lake Meridian. Good luck with whatever one does with that." I'd laughed, alone in my cabin, shaking my head. What did one do with lakebed ownership? At the time, I figured I'd frame the deed and hang it over the fireplace as a conversation piece nobody asked for. But the engineer in me took a deeper look. Lakebed rights meant something. Not glamorous, not useful on most lakes, but legally binding. If anyone wanted to anchor a floating structure, install moorings, place docks beyond a certain distance, lay underwater cables or pipes, technically, they needed permission from the lakebed owner. Me. Still, I didn't think it mattered. For months it didn't. I fished from my dock, fixed up the old boathouse, drove my pickup down the dirt road into town for groceries and coffee filters. People waved. Life was simple. Until the houses started going up on the West Ridge. New builds, clean white siding, aluminum roofs, perfect lawns sprouting in neat rows, the kind of development that attracted rules and committees the way sugar attracts ants. One afternoon, while fitting a new cleat to the dock, I heard the faint sputter of a golf cart engine coming down my gravel path. I looked up and saw a woman in heels and a lemon-yellow blazer navigating the bumps like her life depended on it. It wasn't Bethany. Not yet. This was her scout, one of those chipper HOA volunteers with a clipboard and a voice that sounded like it had permanent smile lines. "Hello there," she'd called. "I'm with the Meridian Shores Planning Committee. We're gathering contact information for all lakeside residents as we prepare for HOA formation." HOA formation. Two words that hung in the air like incoming storm clouds. I remember wiping sawdust off my hands and leaning on the railing. I wasn't aware there was an HOA. "Oh, not yet," she chirped. "But once the community grows, we'll need structure, guidelines, leadership." Leadership. That would be Bethany Reed. By the time her name entered my life, the committee had already printed glossy brochures with pictures of smiling families and perfectly folded towels on pontoon boats. They talked about community cohesion, aesthetic continuity, and shared responsibility. Then came the bylaws drafts. Then warnings pinned to my cabin door about non-standard dock hardware. Then the first letter suggesting I consider voluntarily enrolling in the HOA to avoid future complications. Future complications. Looking back, that was the phrase that lit the fuse. At that time, I still didn't grasp how far the board, or its new president, would go. How much they would threaten, lie, or fabricate to control the lake, or how much weight the lakebed deed in my drawer really carried. But I felt something shifting as summer rolled in. The peace I'd built felt thinner, like the surface tension of water just before it breaks. And one morning, while staring out over the lake, I caught myself wondering, what happens when people who don't own the water start believing they rule it? The answer arrived the very next day, sputtering, whining, and sparkling in a way no golf cart ever should. I was kneeling on the lower dock, tightening a cleat I'd replaced after a windy night. The lake was calm, a pane of glass that caught the reflection of the clouds drifting overhead. A loon called somewhere near the cove, its voice echoing through the trees like a warning I didn't yet understand. Then I heard it. A high-pitched electric whine, too clean and too proud to belong anywhere near my gravel road. I looked up just in time to see a pearl-white golf cart careen toward the marina path like it owned the right-of-way. Chrome trim glinted in the sun. Gold lettering wrapped the side, curling above decorative waves. Meridian Shores HOA, Community Administration. Behind the wheel sat a woman I'd never seen before, but somehow instantly recognized. Posture like a CEO, sunglasses too large for her face, hair lacquered into a helmet. The kind of presence that sucked the air out of a room, or in this case, out of an entire lakeshore. She parked at an angle that nearly blocked half the walkway. Then she stepped out. Heels. On a wooden dock. Who does that? "Mr. Cole," she announced, her voice slicing through the quiet morning. She didn't ask if that was me. She didn't introduce herself with any warmth. She simply declared it, as if reading my name off a list titled People Who Irritate Me by Existing. I wiped my hands on an old rag and stood. "Yes, ma'am?" She approached with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted the sound of her own footsteps. "I'm Bethany Reed," she said, drawing out her title like it was her favorite dessert. "President of the newly formed Meridian Shores Homeowners Association." The way she said it, you'd think she expected applause. I nodded politely. "What can I do for you?" Her lips stretched into a smile that wasn't a smile at all, more like a threat dressed up in lipstick. "It has come to the HOA's attention," she said, tapping on her tablet, "that you have not yet completed the required membership application, nor have you paid your community dues." I almost laughed, but something in her tone suggested she wouldn't appreciate that. "I didn't realize I was required to join an HOA," I said evenly. "I was under the impression my property wasn't part of your development." Bethany blinked once, slowly, as if the idea of someone not accepting her authority was a personal insult. "All Lakeside residents," she said, enunciating each word like she was speaking to a stubborn child, "participate in the HOA. It ensures safety, harmony, and responsible lake usage." "And how much is this participation?" She turned the tablet so I could read the bright, bold numbers. $600 monthly. Lake operations fee, marina aesthetic fee, shoreline view preservation fee, water peace compliance fee. I stared at the screen. Water peace compliance? Bethany didn't blink. "To ensure boats and lake activities do not disrupt the enjoyment of others." I looked out at the lake. Wide, empty, peaceful, not a single wave breaking the surface, and wondered what on earth I was supposedly disturbing. "I'm not paying that," I said calmly. Her smile tightened like a noose. "Mr. Cole, refusal to join the HOA results in fines, citations, and restricted access to HOA-managed property, such as marinas, ramps, docks, and shoreline activity zones. This dock isn't HOA managed." She lifted her chin. "All docks on Lake Meridian fall under HOA oversight. Not this one." Just 3 words, but they hit her like a pebble tossed into still water, small ripple growing fast. Her sunglasses tilted, catching a reflection of my rebuilt dock, my boathouse, the chains and pilings beneath us. Every piece of lumber I had sanded, stained, and installed myself. And then she made her first mistake. "Mr. Cole," she said, lowering her voice, "I strongly advise you reconsider. You may believe you have certain rights here, but the HOA has authority granted by community vote and developer agreements. We maintain this lake." "No," I said quietly. "The lake maintains itself." I could feel her frustration crackle like static. She tapped her tablet again, and a violation notice popped up, my name already filled in. Non-compliant dock. Unauthorized repairs. Failure to join HOA. Interference with lake aesthetic harmony. "I'm issuing these today," she said. "If you don't comply, you'll face additional enforcement measures." I studied her for a moment, the tilt of her chin, the way her manicured fingers clutched the tablet, her need to control every inch of shoreline she could see. "I'm not joining your HOA," I said simply. Her eyes flashed behind the sunglasses. "Then you'll never launch a boat from this marina again." The wind carried her words out over the water. Even the lake seemed to hold its breath. Bethany stepped back into her golf cart and paused, giving me one last narrow look. "You'll regret making this difficult," she said. "Everyone does." She sped off, leaving twin lines in the gravel, like a threat carved into the shore itself. The lake was quiet for a long time after she left. Too quiet. Even the loon didn't call again. And that was the morning I realized. The HOA hadn't come to ask for cooperation. It had come to take control. That evening, the sun dipped behind the western ridge, painting the lake in long strokes of gold that shimmered across the surface like liquid metal. I sat on my dock with a cup of coffee gone cold, replaying every word Bethany had thrown at me. The breeze pushed soft ripples against the pilings. Somewhere far across the water, a boat engine hummed low, fading into the distance. I thought I'd get peace for the rest of the night. But footsteps crunched on the path behind me. I turned to see Jake first, broad-shouldered, sunburned, carrying 2 bottles of beer between his fingers like he'd had practice. Behind him came Sarah with a cardigan pulled tight against the chill, and her glasses perched low on her nose. And last, old Marcus Hale. Not the sheriff, but the retired fisherman with the white beard and one of those voices that always sounded halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "Evenin', Remy," Jake said, raising a beer in greeting. "Mind if we join you?" Sarah added gently. I gestured toward the dock. "Pull up aboard." They settled around me like we'd done this a dozen times before, even though we hadn't. Jake twisted open the beers and handed them out. The first sip tasted like cold hops and quiet dread. Marcus exhaled, the sound soft as wind. "So," he said, "I hear Bethany paid you a visit." I didn't bother asking how he knew. News traveled across Lake Meridian faster than wind across the water. "Yeah," I said, "came rolling down my road like she owned the place." "That's her style," Jake muttered. Sarah folded her hands on her lap. "What did she want?" $600 a month, I said, "and obedience." Jake let out a sharp laugh. "Oh yeah, that sounds like Bethany." The lake glowed copper behind him, a flock of geese flying low in a slow, perfect V overhead. Their wings beat a rhythmic whisper across the sky. "She threatened you, didn't she?" Marcus asked. "She issued violations," I said. "Said if I didn't join, I'd never launch a boat from this marina again." Jake swore under his breath. "Classic. That's exactly what she did to the Caldwells, then to the Petersons, and those folks who moved in last winter." "What happened to them?" I asked. Silence settled for a moment, broken only by the tapping of a loose rope against a metal cleat. Sarah finally spoke. "They gave in." Marcus nodded. "Or moved out." Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Look, Remy, we're not here to scare you, but you need to know what you're dealing with. Bethany didn't just form an HOA, she built an empire." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You ever notice that big floating clubhouse on the East End?" he asked. "Sure," I said. "Looks like something that belongs on a cruise ship." "That's because it might as well be," Jake said. "But here's the kicker." He lowered his voice despite no one being around. "There's a good chance it's illegally anchored." That caught my attention. Sarah nodded. "We've suspected it for a year now. Floating structures have strict anchoring rules. They need permits, environmental assessments, lakebed rights. You don't just throw down chains and call it a day." Lakebed rights. The words knotted in my stomach. "Bethany never got those approvals?" I asked. Marcus barked a small laugh. "Bethany doesn't get approvals. She bullies people until they stop asking questions. But anchoring a floating clubhouse requires permission from whoever owns the land beneath the water." A cold breeze brushed across my arms, raising goosebumps. I kept my voice steady. "Have you ever looked into who owns the lakebed?" Jake shook his head. "Nobody knows. County had it for a while, then some mining company, then, I don't know, it's a mess." Sarah adjusted her glasses. "Why, Remy? You know something?" I hesitated, staring out at the place where the clubhouse floated, a 3-story silhouette against the fading sky, glowing warm from the inside like a lantern too big for the water holding it. Clink, clink, clink. A sailboat's halyard tapped gently against its mast, the same hollow sound I heard earlier on the marina dock. A reminder. "I know," I said slowly, "that I bought my cabin and surrounding land from a county liquidation sale." "Yeah, but that's just your shoreline," Jake said. "Your property stops at the waterline." I took another sip of beer. "Does it?" Sarah's eyes widened, reflecting the last of the sunlight. "Remy, what exactly did you buy?" I didn't answer. Not fully. Not yet. because the truth was still settling inside me, still sharpening. Jake cracked open another beer and handed it to me. "Look, buddy," he said, "you're a good guy, but you gotta watch yourself. Folks who push back against Bethany usually regret it. HOA security starts showing up. Inspections multiply. Fees, fines, rumors, everything gets worse before it gets better." Marcus leaned back, letting his boots rest on the lower rung of the dock ladder. "She wants power, son. That's all. And she'll take it from anyone who doesn't fight back." Their faces were tired. Tired of battles I hadn't even seen yet. Tired of tiptoeing around a woman who thought a title on a letterhead made her queen of a lake. The wind picked up again, rustling pine needles along the shoreline. The water darkened into a deep blue bruise as the last light faded from the hills. And somewhere beneath those ripples, I knew, lay old survey markers and deed claims that Bethany had never bothered to research. Couple that with the anchor chains of a floating clubhouse she believed she had the right to place. Twist number 2 wasn't a single moment. It was a slow click, like tumblers turning inside a lock. Something under that lake wasn't hers. Something she'd built her authority on wasn't hers. And the deed in my drawer, the one the clerk had joked about, might matter more than anyone imagined. "Thanks for the warning," I told them as they stood to leave. Jake squeezed my shoulder. "Just be careful. You don't know what she'll do next." I watched them disappear up the gravel path, 3 silhouettes swallowed by the deepening night. The lake was silent again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. The next morning, the fog clung low across the water, drifting like pale smoke through the pine trunks. My boots crunched over wet needles as I walked down to the dock, still thinking about everything Jake, Sarah, and Marcus had said. Their warnings hung over me like the mist itself, soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. I set my coffee on the railing and pulled out the old metal lockbox I kept in the boathouse. Inside, under folded maps and survey notes, was the deed, the lakebed deed, the one that had seemed like a novelty when I first bought it. Now it felt heavier, like a weight tipping the scales. I traced the embossed county seal with my thumb. The paper smelled faintly of dust and old administrative halls, and beneath that scent, something sharper, possibility. That was when I heard footsteps on the dock behind me. Soft ones, careful ones. I turned to see Sarah approaching, her cardigan pulled tight against the cool air, glasses fogging slightly around the edges from the morning chill. She carried a manila folder under her arm like it was a fragile piece of evidence. "Morning, Remy," she said, voice low. "Morning," I replied. "You're up early." She gave a humorless smile. "Didn't sleep. HOA nightmares again." She stepped beside me and leaned on the railing, looking out over the water. The fog stirred just enough to reveal the silhouette of the floating clubhouse at the far end of the lake. 3 stories tall, glassy and smug, anchored by chains no one had ever questioned. "I brought something," Sarah said, tapping the folder lightly. "What is it?" "Receipts," she said. "Financials. Things people gave me over the past year. The HOA's numbers don't make sense. Never have. And after last night, I figured you might want to see for yourself." I opened the folder. There were spreadsheets, printouts of bank statements, lists of vendor payments, photocopied checks. Some documents were crisp, others were wrinkled from being folded and tucked into pockets or slipped under doors. Many were marked with yellow highlighter or shaky pen circles, notes written by neighbors who were just trying to understand why they kept being charged for things that never seemed to get fixed. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Fraud," Sarah said simply. "Or something awfully close to it." She flipped to one page, tapping her finger on a line item. "Look, Lake Maintenance and Preservation Fund. That's supposed to pay for water testing, debris removal, shoreline repairs. But most of the money went to a company called Clear Vista Environmental. And? I asked. She gave me a tight smile. Clear Vista is owned by Bethany's brother. He lives 2 states away and hasn't stepped foot on this lake in 13 years. She turned to another page. This one, Marina Improvement Assessment. Homeowners were charged $5,000 each last year for structural upgrades. But the contractor, listed Brine and Beam Construction, has no state license. And guess who created the LLC? I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. Jake tracked it down, she continued. Paper trail leads to a P.O. box registered to Bethany's husband under his consulting company. I exhaled, slow and long. The fog swirled and thinned over the lake, as though it were revealing things on purpose. Here's the worst part, Sarah said softly. These documents don't include permits for the floating clubhouse, no environmental approval, no Army Corps sign-off, no inspection reports, nothing. That thing shouldn't legally exist. Her last words echoed against the marina boards. Makes sense, I said quietly. Bethany said the HOA maintains the lake, but I've never seen a single licensed environmental crew out here. That's because the HOA doesn't maintain it, Sarah said. You do without even trying. Nature does. Rain, runoff, the depth of the lake, these things maintain themselves. All the HOA does is collect money and claim credit. I closed the folder and set it on the railing. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the shift in understanding. The lakebed deed mattered, more than I had realized. And Bethany's entire structure, her rules, her fees, her arrogance, was built on foundations shakier than the silt under this dock. What are those? I asked suddenly, pointing toward the far end of the lake. The fog had thinned just enough to show faint lines cutting into the water, parallel wakes made by a patrol boat. But this boat wasn't cruising. It was circling, round and round, right near the clubhouse. Sarah followed my gaze. They've been doing that for months, she said. HOA security. They call it Marina Oversight Patrol. Most folks around here call it harassment. I watched the boat through the shifting mist. 2 figures inside, both wearing matching uniforms that were just a little too crisp to be official and a little too cheap to be real. They look like they're scanning something, I said. Oh, they are, Sarah replied. Us, our docks, our boats, our movements. I frowned. Who are those guys? Some private outfit Bethany hired. They used to work mall security before this. I couldn't help a dry laugh. Mall security. Her expression didn't change. They think they're a coast guard. The fog peeled away in patches, revealing the nightclub-like glow of the floating clubhouse, warm yellow lights reflecting on the deep blue underneath. But the water beneath the structure was darker than the rest of the lake, heavier looking, as if the world under there held secrets heavier than stone. I swallowed. Sarah, those anchors, those moorings, if they're sunk deep enough, she looked at me sharply, deep enough to reach land that might not be hers? I nodded. Sarah inhaled sharply, almost a gasp. Remy, are you saying? I'm saying, I cut in, that maybe Bethany should have checked who owns the bottom of this lake before she built her empire on it. The wind shifted, cool and sudden, stirring the fog like a beckoning hand. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing behind her lenses as gears turned behind them. You have something, don't you? Something you haven't told us yet. I didn't answer, but my silence was answer enough. A low hum drifted across the water again, the HOA patrol boat making its 5th loop, its wake slapping gently against my dock. I watched the ripples spread outward, touching every shoreline they passed. They're going to come after you, Remy, Sarah said quietly. Now that you've refused to join, they'll escalate. They always escalate. I know, I said. What are you going to do? I lifted the deed from the lockbox, holding it up to the morning light. The paper glowed pale and strong, its edges catching the soft breeze. You warned me last night, I said. Now it's my turn to prepare. The patrol boat circled once more, its engine droning like an insect. But for the first time, I wasn't just watching it. I was watching what lay beneath it. And I wasn't the one who should have been afraid. 2 mornings later, just as the first streaks of pink began to climb the sky, the lake woke me with a sound I'd never heard out here before. A roar. Not thunder, not wind. Engines. Multiple. I stepped onto the porch and froze. HOA lake security boats, 3 of them, were already tearing across Lake Meridian, churning the still water into white froth. Their navigation lights flickered in the dawn haze, ghostly and jittery. All 3 boats angled toward my dock like they were coordinating a strike. Beside them, on the shoreline walkway, I saw flashlights bouncing, officials in bright windbreakers moving quickly, and behind those shapes, yellow tape, long strips of it, bundled under someone's arm like they were decorating for a crime scene. My jaw tightened. So, this is how she escalates, I muttered. As the boats drew near, their wakes slammed against my pilings. The dock shuddered beneath me, boards creaking like old bones. The sky was barely awake, but Bethany's machine ran at full throttle. The first boat cut its engine near my slip. The second drifted into formation beside it. The third passed close enough that I could see the driver smirking beneath the 2 new uniform cap. Then the lead boat's loudspeaker crackled. Attention, property owner. This dock is under temporary HOA enforcement. Temporary. I almost laughed. The voice continued, magnified across the lake. People were waking in cabins up the ridge. I saw lights hitting windows, silhouettes moving behind blinds. This structure is non-compliant and unsafe. All vessel movement from this dock is hereby suspended. I stepped forward, hands loose at my sides. Unsafe how? I shouted back. I built this dock myself. It passes every county code. A man wearing an orange vest stepped off the walkway and onto the upper end of the dock. He carried a clipboard and moved like he knew he shouldn't be here. He avoided my eyes. Behind him, another worker raised a roll of bright yellow tape and began looping it around my dock posts, wrapping the rails, threading it across the walkway as if sealing off a hazard. What do you think you're doing? I called. It's HOA safety protocol, the worker said quietly. His expression said something different. Please don't blame me. And then the golf cart appeared. Not the plain kind. Not even the pearl white one I'd seen before. This one gleamed metallic silver in the growing daylight. Chrome wheels. HOA decals freshly applied. It rolled down the gravel path like a conqueror returning from victory. Bethany Reed stepped out. A new suit, pink again, but lighter this time. The color of cotton candy at a carnival. The shade clashed violently with the morning light, or maybe with the sight of the 6 security officers flanking her, like she'd hired a small army. Her heels clicked across the dock. Sharp, purposeful, angry. Mr. Cole, she announced, her voice slicing clean through the engine noise. As of this morning, you are officially prohibited from using your dock until all violations are resolved. There are no violations, I said. She tilted her head. The HOA disagrees. I breathed in slowly. Pine, damp boards, diesel from the patrol boats, the smells of my home mixing with the stench of her authority. What violations? I asked. She tapped her tablet, then read dramatically. Unauthorized repairs, lack of HOA inspection approval, shoreline disruption, non-standard cleat installation, and, she looked up, savoring the next part, failure to join the Meridian Shores Homeowners Association. I stared at her, incredulous. That's not a violation. It's a choice. It's a requirement, she snapped back. Every lakeside resident participates. Not according to my deed. Bethany's smile sharpened. Your deed ends at the waterline, Mr. Cole. She motioned to her workers. Continue sealing the area. Yellow tape stretched across my ramp, fluttering in the cool breeze. A ribbon of false authority cutting me off from the water I'd lived beside for years. Neighbors had gathered now on porches, boats, balconies. Some filmed the scene with their phones. Others watched quietly, wearing the same expression I'd seen the night Jake warned me. Resignation mixed with fear. I walked toward the worker closest to the tape. Take that down, I said calmly. He froze mid-rap, eyes flicking nervously to Bethany. She stepped forward, heels tapping like a countdown. Touch that tape and you'll be fined for tampering with official HOA documentation. Documentation? I asked. It's caution tape from a hardware store. Bethany raised her chin. It is HOA issued. I looked at her, then at the officers surrounding the dock. Their stance was firm, but their eyes, most of them, looked uncertain. Bethany saw the hesitation too. She worked quickly to fill the silence. If you don't join voluntarily, she declared, the HOA board has authorized me to pursue liens against your property for unpaid fees and assessments, totaling, she checked the tablet, $4,700. The crowd reacted. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered a curse. That's more than my truck is worth, a man down the shoreline muttered. Bethany ignored him. This is your last warning, Mr. Cole. Join the HOA, or we make your life here extremely uncomfortable. Her voice carried across the lake. For a moment, all I heard was wind brushing over the water, the soft slap of waves against the dock, the distant hum of a boat engine far beyond the cove. Then I spoke. No, I said. Just that. Her eyes narrowed. You are making a mistake. You already made one, I replied. You came to my property before learning what I actually own. A flicker crossed her face. Uncertainty, or maybe irritation that I wasn't cowering like she expected. She pointed toward the taped-off dock. You are trespassing on a restricted structure. I stepped onto the planks deliberately, the wood creaking beneath my weight. This is my dock, Bethany. This lake is HOA managed, she snapped. This lake, I said quietly, is not what you think it is. Her jaw tightened. The moment hovered, heavy, electric, fragile as a soap bubble. Then the loudspeaker crackled again. HOA enforcement complete, the patrol officer called. Dock secured. Secured. The word echoed against the hills. Bethany raised her chin once more. You have 24 hours to comply, she said. After that, we escalate further. She turned sharply, heels clicking like punctuation as she strode back toward her silver golf cart. The security boats pulled away in coordinated formation. The yellow tape fluttered behind her in the wind, mocking me in the soft morning light. The neighbors watched. The lake watched. And I stood on the dock, my dock, feeling not anger, but something steadier, resolve. They wanted escalation. They were about to learn what escalation really meant. But first, I had to let the storm hit. It didn't take long. The very next morning, just after sunrise, I heard pounding on my front porch, hard, sharp knocks that rattled the old cabin door. I set down my coffee, the mug still steaming, and opened the door to find Sheriff Marcus Hale standing there, hat in hand, expression somewhere between tired and apologetic. Behind him, 2 squad cars idled, engines humming, lights off but ready. Remy, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, we need to talk. I stepped out onto the porch. Dew glistened on the railing, and the lake below was a sheet of dull silver, fog drifting across like bands of silk. "What now?" I asked. Hale let out a slow exhale. "We received another call from the HOA. Multiple complaints this time. They're accusing you of threatening their staff, obstructing HOA operations, and refusing lawful directives." I stared at him. "You know none of that happened." He didn't argue. He didn't have to. The guilt in his eyes told me he'd been down this road before, with other neighbors. "That's why I came personally," he said. "Bethany insists you're becoming hostile. She wants you removed from the lakefront until an investigation is complete." "Removed?" I repeated. "From my own shoreline?" Hale didn't nod, but he didn't deny it either. "She's pushing hard, Remy, and some folks at the county office listen to her husband more than they should." Of course they did. Influence wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, slipped into the right ears over dinners and charity events. I reached into my jacket pocket. Hale stiffened, not in fear, but in expectation. "You asked me once," I said, "if I had documentation." I pulled out the same sealed envelope I'd shown him on the dock 2 days earlier. The flap was still unbroken, the county seal faintly pressed into the back. "I think it's time you saw what's inside." For a moment, the only sound was the soft lap of water against the rocks below. Then Hale motioned toward the porch table. "Let's sit," he said quietly. We sat across from each other as I opened the envelope with slow, deliberate care. The paper inside smelled faintly of old filing cabinets, dust, and history. I laid the contents out one by one. A deed stamped and registered, a series of survey maps, historical transfer documents from a mining company dissolved decades earlier, and a bold header across the top of the main sheet. Submerged land rights. Meridian Lakebed. Parcel Group C. Hale leaned forward. "What am I looking at?" "You're looking," I said, "at ownership. Mine." His brow furrowed. "Your cabin? Your shoreline?" "The lakebed," I said. "Not the shore, not the water surface. Everything underneath." He blinked. "All of it?" "From the high water line to the deepest point," I said. "Judge signed, county recorded." He lifted the deed carefully, holding it to the light like it might reveal more than ink. "Remy," his voice dropped, almost reverent. "Do you realize what this means?" "I'm starting to," he exhaled slowly. "The HOA's floating clubhouse, the dock extensions, the mooring anchors, all sitting on property they don't own," I finished. Hale leaned back, letting out a long, low whistle. "No wonder Bethany's been nervous," he said. "Someone must have tipped her off that submerged rights even exist. Maybe she thinks the county owns it. Maybe she thinks no one does." "But someone does," I said. "And she never asked who." He nodded once firmly. "Well, she's about to find out." Before I could answer, his radio crackled. "Dispatch to Hale. Be advised, HOA President Reed is requesting immediate officer presence at Meridian Marina. Reports of obstruction, potential threat, and unlawful occupation of an HOA-controlled dock." Hale closed his eyes for a second, gathering patience. "Copy," he said into the radio. "Show me en route." He stood, placing the deed gently back onto the table. "I'm heading down there," he said. "But this time, you're coming with me." The drive from my cabin to the marina felt like traveling into a brewing storm. Lake Meridian stretched wide and restless beneath a brightening sky, the early light catching on yacht hulls like sparks off steel. As we pulled onto the marina road, I saw the spectacle waiting for us. Patrol SUVs lined the boardwalk, HOA security clustered in formation like they'd been rehearsing. Dozens of residents stood watching, murmuring. And at the center of it all, Bethany Reed, suit blazing pink like a flare against the lake's calm blues. The moment she saw me step out of Hale's truck, She pointed dramatically, the gesture so theatrical it could have been choreographed. There! Sheriff, that's him! Arrest him for violating the emergency HOA directive! Cameras turned, phones lifted. The crowd leaned in. Hale walked forward, calm and grounding as a heavy anchor. "Miss Reed," he said, "before we take any action—" "There's nothing to discuss," she cut in. "He's dangerous. He's disruptive. He's trespassing on HOA waters. I demand you remove him immediately." Hale held up his hand, palm out, and the whole dock seemed to pause. "I need to see one thing first," he said. He turned to me. "Remy." I stepped forward and handed him the envelope. Silence dropped over the marina like a curtain. Hale opened the flap, pulled out the deed, and held it where sunlight washed over the paper. He checked the seal, checked the record number, checked the signatures. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to Bethany. "Ms. Reed," he said, voice steady, "I need to ask you something." She blinked. "What?" "Did you or your association verify submerged land ownership before building structures on this lake?" Her posture faltered. Not much, but enough for anyone paying close attention. "That's not relevant," she snapped. "The HOA governs the lake." "No," Hale said quietly. "It doesn't." He turned the deed toward her. "Because Mr. Remy Cole," he said, the words ringing across the boardwalk, "owns the entire lakebed of Meridian Lake. Every square inch of it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone's phone slipped from their hands and clattered onto the dock. Bethany's mouth opened, closed, opened again. A fish pulled out of water. That can't be true," she stammered. "The lake belongs to the community. We have bylaws, we have—" "You have none of the rights you're claiming," Hale said. "And you've placed structures, anchors, docks, and a 3-story floating clubhouse on private land without permission." Her pink suit seemed to drain of its power, sagging at the seams. "You—" her voice cracked. "You can't own a lake." I stepped forward just enough for our eyes to meet. "I don't own the lake," I said. "I own the ground you're standing on." The dock creaked underfoot, as if the lake itself were reacting. Bethany staggered back a step. Her security officers looked at each other, uncertain for the first time. The HOA's illusion of authority cracked like thin ice. And in that silence, heavy, stunned, echoing across the water, everyone finally understood. Everything she'd built, everything she'd threatened, everything she claimed control over was never hers to begin with. Sunlight shimmered across Lake Meridian, catching the ripples moving outward from the floating clubhouse. The massive structure loomed against the far bank like a beached cruise ship, its glass panels gleaming gold in the morning light. A symbol of Bethany's reign, expensive, excessive, and anchored deep beneath the surface, anchored illegally. Sheriff Hale held the deed up again, making sure everyone saw it. A breeze swept through the marina, lifting loose strands of paper from Bethany's folder. Violation notices, fee schedules, warnings. They fluttered like startled birds, scattering across the dock. Someone in the crowd laughed. Another clapped once. Not loud, but enough. The spell broke. The HOA patrol officers shifted uneasily, as though their uniforms suddenly didn't fit right. One of them removed his sunglasses, wiping at his forehead. Another took a step back from Bethany, putting distance between them without meaning to. Bethany's voice, usually sharp and unshakable, wavered. "This is fraud," she hissed. "This is manipulated. This is absurd." Hale didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "County records confirm ownership," he said, checking his radio again. "Filed, logged, recorded, legally binding for over a decade." "No," Bethany shouted, her pink suit trembling with each breath. "The HOA has authority here. The community voted—" "The community," Hale interrupted gently, "can't vote away someone else's property. A hush swept across the dock. Even the lake seemed to still, the breeze softening as if the water was listening. I turned to face Bethany fully. "You never once checked," I said quietly. "Not when you built the clubhouse. Not when you sank the anchors. Not when you sent your workers onto private lakebed. You assumed control without understanding the land you were standing on." Bethany's lips parted, but no sound came out. Behind us, a canoe bumped softly against the marina wall. Tap, tap, rhythmic, like a heartbeat returning after a shock. A chorus of murmurs rolled through the gathered neighbors. Jake and Sarah had pushed their way to the front. Sarah's eyes were wide, reflecting the sunlight, as if she were finally seeing hope in something that had long felt impossible. Jake crossed his arms, letting out a low whistle. "Bethany," he said, shaking his head, "looks like you built your castle on the wrong ground." Her anger flared, brief but blinding. "This is not your concern, Jake." He raised an eyebrow. "Lady, it stopped being your lake 5 minutes ago." She spun toward her security guards. "Well," she demanded, "remove him! Arrest him! Do something!" But they didn't move. One of them, a younger man with a too large life vest, looked down at his boots. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "if he owns the lake bed, then the clubhouse is, well, it's on his property." "That's trespassing," another added. Hale nodded. "Correct," he said. "Criminal trespass, technically. Potential environmental violations. Possible fraud if funds were used without lawful authority." Bethany's face drained of color. "You can't charge me," she whispered, panic threading her words. "You can't do that. You don't understand the work I've done, the improvements, the services. This community needs leadership." "What this community needs," Sarah said softly, stepping forward, "is honesty." "And actual permits," Jake added, unable to resist. The crowd didn't laugh. Not yet. But they shifted, an unmistakable shift, like a tide turning. Shoulders straightened, heads lifted. People who once avoided Bethany's eye now looked straight at her. The floating clubhouse loomed in the background, its reflection trembling in the water like the last glow of a fire about to go out. "Ma'am," Hale said, voice firming, "until we review this legally, you and your board must cease all enforcement actions. That includes patrols, fines, violations, and property restrictions." Bethany shook her head violently. "No, no, absolutely not. We have authority. We have contracts. We have—" She stopped, because for the first time she realized no one was standing with her. Her guards were silent. The residents were silent. The deputies stood between her and the community she had ruled with fear. The lake around her, quiet, patient, ancient, seemed to reject her claim as clearly as any court ruling ever could. Her power wasn't just slipping, it was evaporating. I stepped forward again, lowering my voice so only she and the sheriff could hear. "You should have checked the deed before waging a war over a lake you never owned." Her face contorted. Anger, confusion, fear, disbelief, all clashing at once. Far across the water, the floating clubhouse creaked. Chains groaned beneath the surface, metal grinding against rock. It was eerie, the sound of a structure shifting under the weight of truth. Hale turned to the crowd. "Until further notice," he announced, "the HOA is temporarily suspended pending investigation." People gasped. One neighbor covered her mouth. Another whispered, "It's over." Bethany swayed where she stood. Her hand hovered at her chest, clutching nothing but empty air. "This isn't fair," she said softly. "This isn't how it's supposed to go." I held her gaze. "Power built on lies never lasts," I said. Behind her, a gust of wind kicked up, scattering the last of her violation notices off the dock. The papers twirled and sailed over the water before sinking one by one, like the unraveling of a story she no longer controlled. And as they disappeared beneath the surface of the lake I owned, Bethany Reed realized the truth. Her empire was floating, but its foundation had never touched solid ground. In the days that followed, the lake felt different, quieter. Not peaceful, no, not yet, but suspended, like breath held between storms. The floating clubhouse sat still in the water, its reflection trembling each time the wind brushed past. The HOA patrol boats stayed tied at their slips, engines cold, their once frequent circuits around the lake reduced to nothing more than idle memories. But beneath that strange stillness, something else was moving. Something sharper. Something official. It began with 2 black sedans rolling into the marina parking lot. County plates, tinted windows. Then another car, this one with a state seal on the door. And finally a third. A boxy SUV carrying a woman in a tailored navy suit who moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who didn't knock on doors. She walked through them. The lake community gathered like ripples, quiet at first, then widening as word spread. "Investigators," Jake murmured when he appeared beside me on the dock. "Guess things are about to get interesting." Sarah joined us moments later, holding a folder thicker than the one she had shown me before. "I brought everything," she whispered. "Financial records, testimony, receipts. I even highlighted the suspicious transfers." "You highlight everything," Jake muttered. She ignored him. From across the marina, Bethany stumbled toward the state officials, wearing a suit the color of overripe peaches and a look of raw disbelief. Her usual confidence was gone, stripped away like varnish in a storm. Even her hair, normally sculpted to architectural precision, seemed to wilt in the morning humidity. "You can't do this," she barked at the investigators. "This is a misunderstanding, a clerical error. The HOA is fully compliant. We operate under community authority." "Ma'am," the lead investigator said, lifting a hand. "We'll need to see your permit files for all lake structures, financial disclosures for the past 3 years, and documentation for all assessments charged to homeowners." Bethany blinked. "Permit files?" "Yes," the investigator said. "For the floating clubhouse, the moorings, the dock extensions, environmental impact studies, engineering approvals." Bethany's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Additionally," the investigator continued, "we'll need documentation granting your association legal authority to build on land you did not own." A low murmur moved through the crowd like wind pushing through tall grass. Bethany turned pale. "You don't understand," she stammered. "We didn't need those approvals. The HOA, the investigator interrupted, is not above state law, or property law, or federal environmental regulations." She stepped aside, allowing a second official to unload boxes from the SUV. "Today," she announced, "we begin a full audit." Behind us, shutters clicked. Residents filmed with shaky hands. The smell of lake water and engine oil hung heavy in the air. Bethany tried one last time. "We are a private association," she snapped. "Our records are confidential." "Not when fraud is suspected," the investigator replied. The words hit her like a push. Her knees softened, her breath stuttered, and then came the real blow. Another car pulled up, sleek, silver, a little too polished for a rural lake. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a crisp blue suit and polished shoes that had never touched gravel in their life. The developer. His name was Richard Brightman, and whispers rippled through the crowd at the sight of him. He had funded the West Ridge builds, the ones that brought Bethany her base of power. His influence stretched into the county, into real estate boards, even into state committees. If Bethany had been a queen, he had been her kingdom's treasurer. But today he looked afraid. "Mr. Brightman," the investigator said, greeting him with a nod. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." He swallowed hard and straightened his tie. "Yes. Well, I thought it was time I provided some clarity." Bethany spun toward him, outrage replacing fear. "Richard, thank God you're here. Tell them, Tell them the HOA was authorized. Tell them. But Richard wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. To this day, I don't know what he saw in my eyes. Resolve, maybe. Truth. Or simply the inevitability of consequences finally catching up. He turned to the investigators and opened his briefcase. I have emails, he said. Internal correspondence, HOA directives, instructions from Ms. Reed regarding fee allocations and contractor arrangements. Bethany went still. Her expression collapsed into something hollow. You, my own developer, you're betraying me? She gasped. Betraying? Richard echoed. Bethany, you built a 3-story structure on private land. You charged people for services that don't exist. I'm not going to prison for your ego. It was twist number 4, and it hit harder than I expected. The crowd erupted, loud whispers, gasps, someone muttering, "Knew it," under their breath. Sarah clutched her folder tighter. Jake whistled low. The walls of Bethany's power didn't just crack, they caved in. It's not true, she cried, stepping backward. It's all exaggeration, interpretation. You can't do this to me. The investigator raised an eyebrow. We're not doing anything to you, Ms. Reed. We're uncovering what you did to this community. She reached out, grabbing the railing of the dock as if the world were tipping sideways. For a moment, I saw not the authoritarian who had stormed my property, but a woman staring at the ruins of something she'd believed unshakable. Her voice broke. You don't understand, she whispered. I kept this lake running. I kept these people in line. I made this place valuable. No, I said softly. The lake was valuable long before you tried to own it. She looked at me, eyes hollow, filled with something between hatred and despair. You ruined everything, she hissed. I held her gaze. No, I said. You built everything on a lie. The investigators moved in then, taking boxes, gathering statements, handing out forms. The lake community swarmed with murmurs and long overdue relief. The floating clubhouse groaned again in the wind, as if even it knew its days were numbered. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long, shimmering reflections across the water, I realized something profound. The HOA wasn't falling because of what I owned. It was falling because of what she'd done. And Lake Meridian, quiet, patient, enduring, was finally taking its power back. The official collapse came 3 days later. By then, the investigators had spread out across the marina like a small army, opening storage sheds, photographing financial logs, interviewing half the neighborhood. The HOA office was sealed off. Boxes were removed. Laptops confiscated. The air buzzed not with fear anymore, but with a rare kind of excitement, like justice had finally pulled a chair up to the table. Bethany hadn't been seen since the audit began. Rumor had it she stayed inside her glass-walled mansion, blinds closed, phone calls unanswered. Others said they'd seen moving trucks in her driveway, though no one saw anything loaded. But on the 4th morning, the inevitable arrived. Hale asked me to come to the marina at 9 sharp. The sky was bright, not a cloud in sight. Lake Meridian glittered with the sort of clarity reserved for good endings and clean slates. When I walked down the boardwalk toward Hale and the county attorney, I noticed the crowd. 24 neighbors gathered quietly, respectfully, as if attending a ceremony. And in a way, we were. The county attorney cleared his throat and unfolded a thin packet of papers. By state statute, he began, and by determination of ongoing investigations, the Meridian Shores Homeowners Association is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. A wave of murmurs swept through the group. Some people gasped softly. Others let out breaths they'd been holding for years. Behind us, the floating clubhouse cast its massive shadow across the water, hulking, useless, defeated. We further conclude the attorney continued, that funds collected under the association were used improperly and without legal authority. Restitution will be issued based on documented losses and reports from residents. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, relief breaking gently across her face. Jake squeezed her shoulder. The attorney turned to me. Additionally, due to Mr. Remy Cole's legal ownership of the lakebed beneath the structures, the floating clubhouse must be removed, immediately. Everyone looked toward the thing, its steel pontoons half submerged, the morning light glinting off the tinted windows. A symbol of control, power, intimidation, now nothing more than a trespasser. Removal costs, the attorney said, will be charged to Ms. Reed and her affiliates. There were no cheers, no applause, just a long, quiet exhale from an entire community finally free. A demolition crew arrived before noon, hard hats, barges, ropes, hydraulic saws humming to life. People gathered along the marina rails watching the first panels come off. Glass shattered inward, wood beams cracked, metal moorings groaned as they came loose. The water swallowed each fragment gently, as if helping to erase the scar it had carried for too long. Bethany wasn't there. Neither were her security officers. Only neighbors, once divided, now united, watched the dismantling of the empire that had ruled them. As the last section of the clubhouse was hoisted out of the water by crane, sunlight poured over the empty space it left behind. 100 feet of open lake glimmered where the shadow used to be. A clean wound, healing already. Later that afternoon, I invited everyone to my dock. No announcements, no speeches, just an open invitation and a promise of coolers filled with iced tea and whatever food people felt like bringing. It didn't take long before my little stretch of shoreline turned into something I'd never seen before. Community. Kids skipping stones. Neighbors laughing for the first time in months. Jake fishing with Marcus, while Sarah taught someone how to read a financial statement. Old-timers trading stories. People offering help instead of filing complaints. When the sun dipped low, casting long gold paths across the lake's surface, I walked out to the end of my dock and cleared my throat. Everybody, I want to share something with you. The crowd quieted, eyes turning toward me, warm and expectant. I held up a single page, simple, clean, and stamped at the bottom by a notary. This, I said, is a license agreement, $1 a year, for anyone who wants to keep their dock exactly where it is, legally and without fear. A ripple of astonishment moved through the group. Not a fee, I continued. Not an assessment, not a fine. Just permission, written, lawful permission, to enjoy the lake without someone standing over you telling you what you owe for it. Someone clapped, then someone else, and within seconds the dock was filled with applause. Not rowdy, not explosive, but warm, genuine, grateful. People approached me after, shaking my hand, hugging me, thanking me in quiet voices. Not because I'd saved the lake, but because I'd given it back to them. The sky shifted from gold to amber. The water softened with sunset colors, reflecting the smiles of people who could finally breathe easy again. By the time the crowd thinned and the last boat pushed off into the dusk, the lake was calm again, peaceful. I sat at the edge of the dock with a mug of coffee gone cold just from the evening air. The breeze smelled like pine, water, and possibility. Somewhere across the lake, an owl called. Somewhere down the ridge, laughter still echoed faintly. And for the first time since I'd bought the lakebed deed, I felt something settle inside me. Something deep and certain. Not triumph, not revenge, just balance. The kind the lake itself seemed to understand. Real power isn't loud. It isn't forced. It doesn't shout orders from a floating palace or wrap a dock in caution tape. Real power sits quietly beneath the surface, anchored deeper than any storm can reach, written in ink, backed by truth, and held steady by the people willing to stand up for it. As the last light faded, I whispered into the stillness, Lake Meridian, welcome back. If you've ever stood your ground against someone who overreached, drop a simple yes in the comments, or type justice if this story hit home. Out here, doing what's right still matters, even when the odds look lopsided. And if you want more true grit HOA and land justice stories just like this one, feel free to stick around and subscribe. I'd be glad to have you here for the next ride.